Hey, I'm Lady C, and welcome to Hidden Struggles. We're in the second conversation of a three-part series with Daria, a former Jehovah's Witness, my good friend, who left this organization and found her voice. If you missed the first part, I've listed it in the description, but you can also enjoy this one on its own. Today, we're talking about what happens when speaking up comes at a cost. In your rearview mirror, can you actually believe that you believed all that and allowed them to control you like that?
No, I can't believe it. And I was never good at it anyway. I was one of those sisters that I think that the elders I wasn't a troublemaker, and I don't like a gossip. I don't like a busybody. I don't like someone who keeps chaos and confusion. There's a lot of that in the environment. I was anti that, but I was someone who had an opinion, who was an independent thinker. And as a woman, that's a no no. So I think that I was frowned upon for that reason. So I was, like I said, I was never going to be great at it. But I can't believe that I stayed in as long as I did. But my reasons for staying in really had to do with my love of my parents and wanting to make them happy.
Yeah.
That's why I did it. It didn't have anything to do with my relationship with God. I feel more connected to God and more of a spiritual person now than I ever did as a Jehovah's Witness. And that's the other part of it. This has nothing to do with God. If I hear one more time the governing body has decided, I think I want to just and I think that in the rearview mirror, when I look back and I think about the people in my life that are still a part of this organization, and that's something else that I want to touch on. You're always going to be affected by it. It's
Mhm.
never going to go away. And to be in this happy, peaceful state about my life right now does not mean that I don't have challenges and frustrations and even heartbreak when it comes to certain family members that I wish could wake up, because I see what the religion is doing. But I think that outside of the people that are PMO or physically and mentally out, and everybody has their reasons, there are people that could lose everything, their livelihood, their families, their spouses, their children. So I get that and I respect that. And I hold space for that. And I give those people a lot of grace. But I think that there are a vast majority of people walking around in this organization with some cognitive dissonance, with lots of doubts and questions and feelings and thoughts and things that they know just aren't adding up. That's not right. They know it, but they don't have the courage to act on it and to speak it and to say it. It takes a lot of courage to do what we have done. It takes a
Mhm.
lot of courage,
It does.
and you have to be willing to be judged. You have to be willing to not care. I really don't care what people think about me. I don't. And in terms of who I am as an individual, um, I treat people fairly. I lead with love. I lead with kindness. I set clear boundaries. I know who I am. I know what I want out of life. I don't treat people harshly. I think my personal politics are good. I care about humanity and the greater good of all. I have all of that in perspective. And I'm also someone that is constantly working on myself. I
Yeah.
know that growth is an ongoing process. And that's something else that Watchtower would have you think otherwise. Oh, well, let me just get to be a ministerial servant. Let me pioneer. Let me get to be an elder. Let me get to work on the construction projects. Let me do this. And you've reached it all. That's what they have you think. But that again is not how life works.
And I want to kind of stop you just for a second because I know you've said a whole lot. And what I want to go all the way back to what you said about you were opinionated. And
Oh,
the reason why I want to bring this up is because there are so many people in the organization that have been silenced. And your silence speaks volumes because of everything you just got through saying. because you're not knowing who you are. You're not setting goals outside of the religion because you've been silenced from doing that. And the fact that you had an opinion, here's my question to you. What
Mhm.
kind of opinions did you have? And was it wrong to think and have that opinion?
I had a lot of opinions. I had opinions about things that I would hear men get on that stage and say. I had opinions about the way that I saw a lot of men treating their wives and their children. There was a lot of abuse. I had opinions about all of the alcoholism that I saw, all of the double standards that I saw, all of the ways that women were silenced and had no voice. I'm someone who roots for the underdog. I had opinions about the cliques and the way that I would see them disenfranchise certain people that they didn't feel fit the mold. I hated all of it and I didn't think it was right. And because I had those opinions, I wasn't someone that some of the elders liked, but I didn't care. And I never allowed anyone to really marginalize me in that way. I think I've told you this story before when I was going through marital problems leading up to my separation and consequently my divorce, happily divorced. I remember I told my ex husband, I said, I really want to talk to the brothers. And he did not want me to do that. Don't you go talking to the brothers. And I remember he thought that I went and spoke to them and I hadn't, and he gave me the silent treatment, whatever. And when I finally went and spoke to those brothers, and I'm in a room as a woman with three other men and my husband, so four men total. And I remember my ex husband making an attempt to frame me as someone who had mental issues or emotional issues because I said I wanted to go to therapy. And back then, therapy was still, it had more of a stigma then than it does now. And I saw that happening in real time. But because I was someone who spoke up, I spoke up in that meeting and I said, okay, he wants to make me sound crazy and emotional, but you all don't know this, but for the past 3 years, we haven't had any intimacy in our marriage. So explain that to me. Now, I didn't want any of that. I had been done, but I was not going to let these brothers in this room create this narrative that I was some crazy sister who didn't want to conform. I wasn't going to let that happen. And I knew that by giving them that piece of information, it would totally shift the conversation. And that's exactly what happened. But I was smart enough and savvy enough to know how to do that. And so I think it is very, very important for people, particularly women, have your voice, find your voice, do it afraid. I tell people this not just when it comes to this religion and coming up out of it, but in so many areas in the work that I do professionally, do it afraid. Go for it.
When you talked about, your opinions, it's like when you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you may not be on a in the David Koresh group where you're on a physical compound, but I feel like it's a mental compound because
Absolutely.
you can leave the Kingdom Hall and you can go to visit somebody in another congregation. You can go to visit someone in another country, but your mind is still wrapped up in the compound of boundaries, and you can't do this, you can't do that. You're not able to grow your mind. You can't, like you said, go to school, all these kind of things. So at that point in time, when you're opinionated, you kind of like dug through a lot of stuff.
And
I
are
mean,
you really
you
opinionated? Are you
you
really
pulled weeds,
opinionated?
girl. You pulled weeds when you were talking about all the stuff that was happening in the congregation, and you had to be quiet, and you had an opinion for this and that and the other. You were pulling all those weeds out because, if someone's telling me you're too opinionated because you're telling me that XYZ sister's being treated wrong, this abuse is taking place, you're covering up a lot of stuff that, nobody wants to deal with anybody. Anyway, nobody would want to cover over that kind of stuff
And
because,
I'm
and the
sorry, go
real
ahead.
reason why they want to cover it up is because, this is the reason why, we understood about not getting divorces, as Jehovah's Witnesses, because they did not want to have all these people flooding the court system with all these Jehovah's Witnesses and all these divorces, because we want to just make everybody think that we are pristine and we're this perfect group of people knocking on doors trying to bring other people in. But at the same time, all those opinions that you had about those people being treated bad and wrong, they just didn't want that to come to the forefront, to the surface, so that people could see that Jehovah's Witnesses are not perfect, just like other religions are not perfect.
That's
You know?
exactly it. That's exactly it. And the alcoholism, the abuse, the infidelity that goes on in these congregations is rampant. And a close friend of mine who is an ex Jehovah's Witness, I actually call her, we have a running joke in our friend group. We call her the ex Jehovah's Witness whisperer. Because Kathy, I can tell you every single time she goes on vacation, she ends up meeting people, whether it is a couple or an individual, who is an ex Jehovah's Witness. So most recently, she ran into two gentlemen in the Delta Sky Lounge in her travels, and they heard her listening to something. And they were like, I'm an ex Jehovah's Witness too. Are you? And she was like, yes. And of course, the floodgates open and the conversations just happen. And she was talking about the fact that one of the things that woke her up were the infidelities, all these double standards of the men who were known cheaters, serial cheaters on their wives. And they go back there in the back room to get disciplined by the brothers, and they get a slap on the wrist and then continue on. And these gentlemen, these were men, and they told her, oh, well, that's just customary. That happens all the time. And one of them woke up in his 30s. The other one, I think she said he was in his 50s. But both of them worked in finance in New York and I think Philadelphia or something. And just, in their travels. And that's one of the things that they acknowledged to her. And these are complete strangers that have this thing in common, that they were a part of this cult or this high control religion or whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that calling it out, calling the behavior out. And the difference is, see, this happens in other religions as well. I know that. But the difference to me and what makes Watchtower worse is that they don't want to acknowledge it and really deal with it. And I know this happens in other religions, but it gets called out, and people are handled. And they would have us think, when we were a part of this, that we were the only ones that had a system to discipline, and everything was structured. Not true. Not true. There are things that are allowed by region, by culture, and different parts of the country, different parts of the world. We know this now. I know that in certain parts of these here United States, you
Right.
can't tell me that in certain areas of certain states, these people weren't going to the polls or mailing that ballot in. There is no way. You will not convince me that they haven't been politically active. Meanwhile,
Yeah,
some of us who really should have been politically active all these years were not.
that's right. I mean, there's so much that the religion tried to control, and like you stated earlier, they weren't banking on the internet being here. They were not
Mm-mm.
banking on people that would just go out on the internet and start to do research.
That's
and
right.
and that's the reason why they had that part on the assembly, the convention this past summer, or this summer, about if someone brings it to you about this not being the truth, then to turn them in right away, because
That's
they're
right.
losing so many people and brothers, that they're appointing young men elders at 21, 23 years old
I
you
know.
know
I know.
so
I
it's
do know that. And it's sad. And when I think about certain populations and people that I love that are of a certain generation, it makes me sad
Hmm.
because I know that when some of these people who have been witnesses for 40, 50, 60 years sit here and hear them say things like, it's okay to toast, or you can grow a beard, or we're not going to call it disfellowshipping, we're going to call it removed. These are people who have a love of scripture. These are people who really do have a heart for God. Okay. And so they might be misinformed. They're not really studying, and they've been doing it for so long, they don't even know what that looks like.
Hmm.
But they are sitting there frustrated and unhappy. And I want to say to those people, you can break free of this. You can break free and have, if you are a believer, have a relationship with God, have some fulfillment, have some peace, have some enjoyment. Life is hard.
It
People
is.
need people need something to lean on in these times. And I would love for some of the people that I know that desire this to be able to get it. And that, I think that's one of the reasons why I can't stand Watchtower so much, because I
Hmm.
see how it's hurting people. I see how it's
Yeah.
hurting people.
I think, I mean, and I don't know if you feel this way, but in just observing people,
Mhm, mhm.
and we're just talking about when we were talking about earlier about getting knowledge and knowing who you are and who you're about and all that kind of stuff. To me, it's like being one of Jehovah's Witnesses, even if a person didn't want to physically remove themselves from the group, they could still get to know who they are. They could still learn and get educated.
I
And
agree.
so I just feel like people are just sitting there waiting because of what you see in the news today. I feel like people are in a situation where they believe that the end is right around the corner, especially what's happening in our country, in the United States.
Mhm.
In all the years I've been living, I've never seen the country coming loose at the seams the way it is right now. And
I
I
mm.
feel like Jehovah's Witnesses think this is it. I think that they believe that the end is right around the corner, and I think that's the reason why they're probably not leaving. The people that's
I
still there.
I agree with that somewhat, because I believe that there were these pinnacle moments in society that happened in times past where this same feeling permeated. Now, do I think it is a different type of intensity right now because of technology, because of the 24-hour news cycle, because of smartphones and the way that we consume information? Sure, it's different than the perilous times that this country in particular experienced in the 60s, okay? Or in the 70s, or we can go back further to the beginnings of this religion in the late 1800s, and what we were experiencing around post reconstruction and things that were happening. There have always been these moments in society since this religion has existed. It's not It's still a relatively new religion when you think about the centuries that we can assign to other belief systems and Christianity as a whole. Okay. But when we're talking about Watchtower and the late 1800s, when Charles Taze Russell started this fundamentalist group of people, there were things happening in American society at that time that
Mhm.
had never happened before. And like I said, there are these moments when you look at the history of the organization of significant growth, and you can make the correlation to whatever was going on within the world today at that time. And so I think that what we're experiencing right now is a little bit of the opposite. I think that the people that you mentioned, yep, there are some old timers, if you will, let's call them that are sitting there and saying the world is going to end any day now, any day now. But we've been hearing that since I mean, I'm middle aged, and I've been hearing that. And I'm not saying that there isn't a shift in things that are happening in society, but we've been here before. And I think the difference now is where they've had all this incredible growth as a result of what's happening around them. That's not what's happening with Watchtower. So they're scrambling to shift, to change some of the tenets of the faith, of the doctrine, of the business model, if you will,
Hmm.
to hold on to what they have and to become more mainstream and appealing to get members to come. That's what's going on with them right now. They're trying to figure out, that's why you have all these shifts. I venture to say, I know I keep mentioning it, but it's just the goofiest thing to me ever. I would venture to say that in terms of this toasting and clinking, probably some of these governing nobody members, that's what I like to call them, but some of these leaders of the organization were somewhere in New York toasting, and someone made a comment about it. And then there was a conversation, and then they decided they had to figure out a way to address it because
Oh yeah,
it was so random and so out of left field to me that this has happened. And so I think you're going to see more of it. Like I said,
yeah.
you left before I did.
That's
It was different when I left. It is nothing like what I grew up in or what it was when I left. And in
right,
another 5 to 10 years, there are going to be some things that are happening that they're doing that we never thought they'd be doing. I'll
right.
say that.
Well, I agree with you about the clinking of the glasses. I think that, the Watchtower, that's how they've always addressed issues that came up. And it only has to happen one time for them to come out and give a talk about it. And I just think that people are fearful. I think that people don't
Yes.
like change. Um, if I give an analogy of a man who wears a plaid shirt, and he's been wearing this plaid shirt for years, and now you want him to change this plaid shirt and wear something different. If it's something that simple that they can't change, that a person doesn't want to change,
They're
can you
not going to.
imagine
Yeah.
making a change and leaving your whole religious belief system, and a person who has an issue with, not wearing a plaid shirt? I mean, because it has to be comfortable, you know. Um, I'm thinking about the same thing about a bank account. I mean, I'm thinking about changing financial institutions, and I'm sitting there
Hmm.
thinking, how am I going to do that? Do I want to do that? I'm kind of nervous about doing. So I'm just
Yeah.
just little things like that. A man
That's
who don't
right.
want to change his dressing, a person that don't want to change their financial institution. Now you talking about me changing my whole religious belief system,
That's
walking
right.
away from all my friends, and it's like so. A lot of people are just kind of grounded and rooted in this. I'm
That's
gonna
right.
tell you right now. We used to talk all the time in the car groups. If you had a specific group of people that trusted each other, and a lot of times we all looked alike, and we would be
Hmm.
sitting in the car
Hmm.
groups, and we would be talking about what we thought about brother so and so doing X, Y, and Z. And
Yep.
you would basically be pouring your heart out. And I would be thinking, and after I left, I said, man, we used to talk about this stuff all the time. And we would just sit there and just be pouring our hearts out to each other, complaining about the organization. And
Because
it was
it's
like,
not
why didn't we
sustainable.
leave? You know?
Because this is the thing about it. Exactly. Exactly. And I know I sit back and think about experiences and environments that I was in, and I'm like, that was going on. That sister was being abused, or were these people husband and wife swapping and I just didn't realize that that's what they were doing? This person was an alcoholic. This sister or this brother, he was so severely depressed and he wasn't getting the support that he needed, and he was in isolation or she was in isolation. I think about experiences like that
Hmm.
all the time,
Yep.
all the time, all the time. And so you're right. And I think that we're going to see we are going to see people, they're going to be faced with having to make a decision. All right. At what point do I say to myself, this was a house of cards? I got to pick up the pieces. I got to figure out how to get me a foundation and get my footing,
Hmm.
or I'm going to lose my mind. because this is not it. And I think that that's what I just think there's a whole lot of people that are questioning some things, but they have been doing something for so long that they have put stock in that. And to me, that just is not good logic. Just because I've been doing something for so long, if it's not serving me, if it's not making me happy, if it's making me sick,
Hmm.
if it's making me sad, if it's making me tired, if I'm not getting any joy, then
Right.
I have got to be honest with myself. And I think a lot of people are having a hard time being honest with themselves about some things. But I think as we see some things shift, people are going to have to really make some choices. But I think more than anything, what I want your listeners to know, you can overcome. Life is better on the other side. Do it afraid. That fear is going to be there with you. I have challenges right now because of family that's in this that make me sad and break my heart, and I want it to change, but that's not going to knock me off my square. I'm going to keep being consistent and showing up. And I'm resolved. I know that this is not the truth. I'm resolved. When you have a conversation with me as a Jehovah's Witness, you're not going to be able to come at me on the premise of you having something elevated that I don't have. We are right here together.
Hmm.
This is your perspective. This is mine. And that is the way that I articulate. And they don't like that, but I don't care about that. That's the way we're going to have the conversation. I'm
Hmm.
going to respect your boundary, but you are going to respect mine. And just because I am no longer of the belief system that you are, I changed my mind. And I have the right to change my mind, just like you had the right to choose this if you did, if your parents didn't. You chose something different from your parents. I'm choosing something different from mine. We have the right to do that. And I think that I want your listeners to know you can be okay. Be consistent. Learn who you are. Have an open mind. Lean into unlearning and new learning and be
Yeah,
consistent about it.
I totally agree. I think it's like breaking the cycle.
Hmm.
Someone has to break the cycle where someone can leave the religion and the family can realize that they made a choice, and that's their prerogative. But at the same time, I'm not shunning my child or my parent because they made that decision.
That's
That's the
right.
that's the I think that's the problem that we have in the organization. And that is the reason why this organization has been able to last as long as it has. It's because of that shunning. It's because of the stigma that they put on the members that leave, because
Hmm.
it's associated with leaving God, because they make you think that they are the connection to God. And JT and I did a video on that, and it's called classical conditioning. And so you say, if you leave God, that's bad. But if you leave Watchtower, that's bad. So you put the two together, you take that Watchtower, which is a neutral substance, a neutral thing, and you pair it with God, and you say that they're both the same. And now you can't have one without the other. That's what's happening with Jehovah's Witnesses. And then not only that, but the Jehovah's Witnesses are taught to, they're being gaslit by the Watchtower, but then the Watchtower teaches you to gaslight yourself and those
Hmm.
in the organization.
That's
So
right.
this is it's all like kind of linked together. And this
Yes.
is why that education is not allowed, because once you can connect that dot to realize that I got to break this link, this rhetoric that they're trying to teach us. If
Yeah.
you can get past that and your family says, I fully support you, that you decide to leave, no shunning here, you know, that's the problem. My dad was telling us the other day, he always tells me this. He said, even though your mother was one of Jehovah's Witnesses, when they first got married, she was not a witness. She
Hmm.
became a witness later. And no one ever talked about shunning, because in my family, nobody was disfellowship, or our close friends or people that we knew that would actually, my dad would be like paying attention to that. And
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't introduced to him. And so when he got baptized, and then he decided that he no longer wanted to go to the meetings anymore, and the Jehovah's Witnesses started treating him like he had the plague, and all he did was stop going to meetings. He wasn't disfellowshipped, he wasn't disassociated, nothing like that. But he said he never had. He said he never knew that this religion was about all that. You know,
It's so interesting, and that is also that's not my exact experience, but I think what's funny for me is I refuse to let anybody shun me. I'll shun you before you shun me. And so I was never disfellowshipped or disassociated. I didn't do any of that. I just quit. And because the other thing that's happening with Jehovah's Witnesses and why a lot of them are having these existential crises is because the people that have left don't fit the narrative of what they were told would happen. And that is why I also say to people, especially young people, when you're coming up out of this, know what you want in life, write your goals down, and prove them wrong.
that's right.
And so you can take me for example, you can take some of my siblings for example. We have all done some amazing things in our lives, and I give all the credit to God for that because I am a believer. But I meet people where they're at. I have friends who are not believers, and I'm okay with that. But I'm saying I know that we don't fit the narrative of what they said would happen when you quote unquote leave the truth. And so that's the other thing that happens. I have been in environments where witnesses are looking at me with confusion and bewilderment.
So, Daria, when you think about when you left this religion, when you look at how you were taught to believe in, the way you were perceived by the world and how people looked at you as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, do you think that that really matches up to your true experience as one of Jehovah's Witnesses?
Absolutely not. I think that the experience of being a Jehovah's Witness is very nuanced depending on who you are and your background and your culture, your region. But I think that for me, as a middle aged Black woman from the Midwest United States, my experience as a Jehovah's Witness is very different from, say, someone in California or someone in New York City, or even someone in London, a male counterpart, a Caucasian male counterpart in London, or certainly in these United States. I think that they are very different lived experiences. And one of the ways that Watchtower totally misinforms us and misguides us is by giving us this idea or this concept that we are this worldwide brotherhood and everything is even and we're all the same and everything. And that's just not the world that we live in. And like I mentioned earlier about those societal constructs, all of that affects how you navigate in this world. And again, we talked about education and how critical that is for certain communities. Telling certain communities that they can't get any education is going to further limit their ability to be successful and have an equitable, decent life. Whereas another community, they may be able to navigate and still have access and privilege and some resources because of their background and their lived experience being different from mine or yours. Our experiences, my experience is not going to be like yours. And I think that for communities of color, uh, Watchtower doesn't do you any favors. Watchtower, it makes everything worse. As a matter of fact, if I'm just going to be honest and say it, uh, being a Jehovah's Witness is one of the worst things that I think communities of color, Black and Brown people can do in this society. It's one of
And
the
why do you think
worst
that?
things to do
Why do you think
because
that?
because we are already, because there are so many social constructs and limitations, and every ism in the book, racism, all of these damaging social constructs and everything that is hurting us as individuals. And it is only amplified because you are a Jehovah's Witness. And they want you to be in this Pollyanna world that we're all the same, and we're just not. And I have experiences that I know are telling. Um, I was in a congregation in what they call a double kingdom hall. Now, what that means is the actual building has two auditoriums, or for people that come from a church environment, two sanctuaries. So you've got an auditorium on this side, an auditorium on this side. And that kingdom hall that I attended was on the border of two cities, a very urban city in Michigan, and then suburbs. So that Kingdom Hall was the home of several different territories throughout. And it's no secret that certain territories have more of one race than another. So on a Sunday, you could walk in that Kingdom Hall and be in the common area and see the two auditoriums, and you could actually see majority of one race on this side and majority of one race on that side. And I remember saying to my ex-husband when we first got to that congregation, this doesn't look good. This does not look good. And he said, yeah, they've tried through the years. They would tell some of the friends, we're going to mix the congregations up, and you're going to go here and they're going to go here to mix it up. And a lot of these friends from a particular congregation refused. They refused to move. We're not going. We're staying where we are. Now, I know on the other side, the other congregation, those friends were like, okay, we're going to do what we're told. We're going to go over here. And if they had said, we're not going, we refuse, there would have been serious ramifications and discipline as a result. And that's just one example. Growing up, the environment, the region where I lived, we were a minority within our circuit, okay, our congregation. Like I said, I'm from the Midwest, and my brother was the one that pointed out to me, this is after the fact. He said, because he was the first to be like, deuces, I'm not doing this. And I'm like, you should have told me, got me hip to the game a long time ago. We joke about it now. But he said to me, he said, why is it that growing up, our congregation was always the congregation that was in charge of cleaning the Kingdom Hall? And these other congregations were in charge of other areas of the assemblies, and the conventions. We were always the ones that were assigned to cleaning the assembly hall. Why is that, Daria? So you're asking me if race plays a part in your experience as a Jehovah's Witness. Absolutely. And if someone says, oh, no, it doesn't, they're not being honest. I just gave you tangible examples. So yes, and all of that shapes what happens when you come up out of this.
Yeah.
That to me, back to discovering who you are and knowing your history.
All right. This has been Lady C, and that's the second part of my 3-part series with Daria. Speaking out took courage, and in our final conversation, she shows how that same courage may have saved her life. Part 3 will be linked here as soon as it's available. So be sure you're subscribed. And don't forget, I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments. And I'll see you on the next episode.